and I'm looking forward to welcoming my good friend, Justin Leigh. How are you?
Good afternoon, Paul. I am really well, thanks. Really well. How are you doing?
I am very, very good. Glad you're here. Glad
Mm.
you're here. I said this would be quite challenging. I don't want to make this a boring interview. I know that when we work together, we really do help each other through really challenging and getting each other to really think through with our coaching work. So
Yes.
I want to say congratulations on your new book,
Thank you.
Coaching Leaders, Unlock Your Leadership Power. And one I've actually read most of is Inspire, Influence, and Sell. But
Thank
for
you.
the audience, lovely. So for the audiences, though, are these just run-of-the-mill business books? Why should they read, for example, Inspire, Influence, and Sell? Because it just looks like a business book.
It does look like a business book. You're absolutely right, Paul. And it's not. It's the short answer.
Okay.
I deliberately wrote Inspire, Influence, Sell as a book that would help people to think about their professional and personal growth. So it goes way beyond just a sales training manual or a sales book. The subtitle of Inspire, Influence, Sell is Master the Psychology, Skills and Systems of the World's Best Sales Teams. And even if you're not in a sales role, one of the things that's really important, I think, throughout life and certainly in your career is to learn how to communicate effectively, influence other people, and start to sell your ideas. And that's the big thing. Inspire, Influence, Sell, once it's written for a sales professional, and they'll get massive value from it. Anybody who is interacting with customers, managing other people, having to interact with other people in their organization, they have to learn to communicate. And it really does help you to think about a structure for communication and then thinking beyond that to, okay, what do I want for my career? What do I want for my life? How do I start to develop and grow myself and my potential? So, that's me extolling the virtues of the book, but it really does come at sales and communication from a completely different angle.
Yeah, and if we don't know how to sell ourselves, a lot of people are jumping onto social media bandwagons now, becoming influencers. They want to become self-employed, be entrepreneurial. So learning to sell is a very important aspect. So what is the cost then of not knowing how to communicate and how to sell?
I think the cost is probably irrelevance. If you're not able to effectively communicate, influence, sell to other people, I think you find yourself just not being able to connect with people, not being able to make the progress you want and achieve your goals, because we all have ideas, we all have aspirations. And if you haven't got the ability to communicate those aspirations, get people on board that can help you to meet and achieve them, then ultimately you're going to constrain your own progress. And it depends what you want for yourself in your life. Certainly I remember, I went into sales reluctantly at the age of about 20, between 21 and 22. I say reluctantly because it wasn't a career path I chose. It was more of a move away from the job I was in at the time. And within probably 3 to 4 years of being in a sales position, learning how to communicate to customers, learning how to engage and influence, the difference that gave me in my own personal confidence and my ability to then start to set and achieve different types of goals for myself was really quite a transformation from, before I had those skills to afterwards. It's been something that, I continually work on now, and I can see the distinct difference it makes in my, career well-being and ultimately, I guess, success over the long term.
No, I mean, it's obviously quite a journey for you. I mean, sales is like a dirty word still, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that
It
why
is,
people
yeah.
often, when I work with clients and their mindsets around sales, you can see them almost begin to curl up. And I've had that sort of feeling myself when it comes to people saying, you need to market your business this way, you need to market the podcast that way. And there's a small part of me that says, I don't know, I don't want to feel like I'm pushing myself onto people and, again, making it look cheap. So
Yeah.
what is the mindset that we need to get into when it comes to sales? Is there a different word? Is there a different perspective? What is it that would help someone?
Yeah, I agree. You're absolutely right. Sales, I don't meet many people who say, I want to be a salesperson. It's not something you hear people say, that's my aspiration. People tend to fall into sales, or they find themselves with an opportunity and they take it and move into sales. I think, the big thing for the big perception shift for me, because the first couple of years in sales, I didn't really think of myself as a sales professional. And then I learned how to communicate more effectively. And one of the big shifts that happened for me, so I spent the first couple of years in sales working for a company, and I hadn't been trained to communicate effectively. I was kind of winging it and working it out along the way. And then when I was finally trained, one of the big shifts that happened for me was this change in perception, that instead of me trying to pitch and persuade someone round to my point of view, the way that I should be doing it is much more consultative. I should start in my mind with what I'm trying to achieve and have a goal, right? I want to, influence or persuade someone to this point of view, but then change perspective and start to inquire and ask questions of the other person to understand what is it they're trying to achieve. And once I understand what they're trying to achieve, and they can be clear about that, and the way you do that, obviously, is to ask questions, listen carefully, summarize what someone tells you, ask more questions, and just get to a point where you truly understand the other person, almost try and meet them where they are. And one of the analogies, I think about and I use in my coaching is, actually think, instead of being on the opposite side of the table from somebody else, try and get round to their side of the table, try and sit alongside them, not in opposition to them. And if you can get alongside somebody and really, really understand them and empathize and create rapport and establish a relationship, from that position, you're much better equipped then to be able to talk to them about how you can help them, or how your ideas actually match with what they're trying to achieve as well. And that was a huge shift in thinking for me, and has been transformational to the point where now, I'm quite proud of working in sales, helping sales teams, sales leaders to do the work that they do best, which is to engage their customers, understand what they need, and help them to meet those needs at the highest level. And just that shift in perspective can be hugely impactful, because you start to think differently about either the work you're doing, or the conversation you're having, or the way in which you're trying to help the other person. Rather than sell to them, you're trying to help them meet a need or solve a problem. That's the big shift.
Yeah, that is a big mindset shift, isn't it? And I think that when I learned that, through coaching, that just finding out what the other person really needs, what is it that they truly want, and can I help them? It becomes less salesy and more about, am I the right person to help you? That's a huge thing. What do you think? What mistakes do you think people make when it comes to trying to sell? When it comes to that mindset, so if they're not doing that, if I'm not trying to help you, that's one mistake. They're just trying to just almost like, bang a square peg into a round hole and you'll take my product. What other mistakes are there that people make when it comes to selling themselves, or their products, etc.?
I think the big one is that pitching an idea, or pitching a product or solution, or and it doesn't just have to be in sales. In life generally, we can make the mistake of just trying to force someone's opinion to change to our own, and that's really difficult. If you've ever tried to persuade someone of something when they're in a completely opposite position, and you haven't tried to empathize or understand their position first, your chances of persuading them are slim to none, because what happens is that you immediately get this resistance. And if you think about it for yourself, right? If somebody's trying to persuade you of something and they're of the opposite opinion to you, if they don't take the time to understand your position, empathize with it, and clarify it before they start to talk about their own position, our guard goes straight up. And it's the same in sales. If you try and pitch a product to a customer, I think it's why cold calling is so difficult. And, I talk to a lot of companies who actually, they've really had to change their approach, because just trying to talk at people doesn't work anymore. You really do have to get this more consultative, more customer-led approach if you want to be successful to influence somebody else. And so the big mistake is, trying to pitch your ideas or trying to persuade someone of something that is completely opposite to where they are today. And there are things you can do that are successful, but you do have to understand somebody else's position, clarify, empathize, summarize. And if you can do that, from there, the other person is much more likely to want to change their opinion, change their mind, and work with you. Without any of that in place, you are, pushing water uphill.
I mean, it's such an important skill, isn't it? Just to be able to
Mm,
understand another person's needs and to see if what you have is going to be the best option for someone.
yeah.
And being able to listen, to engage, but to communicate effectively. What, going back to you,
Mm.
how did you get into this? Yeah. And
Into
what were your
sales or
biggest challenges?
yeah, so I first got into sales. So I was a technician working in a laboratory, and I served an apprenticeship, finished 4 years, and then realised at the end of that 4 years I didn't want to work in the same room or the same
Mm.
business for my kind of career. So I then was looking for other alternatives and went into sales. So I was on a territory, and it was back in kind of early to mid 90s. So there were no mobile phones. The internet hadn't been broadly distributed. So I literally was given 11 yellow pages, a box of blank record cards, and told to go out and map my territory and make it my own, which I did. I didn't realize there was any other way. So that's what I did. So there were lots of challenges in those early days, right the way from how do you plan what you're doing? How do you engage someone brand new? I was literally cold calling, walking through the door of, at the time it was dental practices, walking through the door of a dental practice, and you can imagine the receptionist would kind of look and go, roll her eyes. Oh yeah, who's this person walked in now? What do they want? So that was quite challenging in itself. But learning some of those rapport building skills, learning some of those things that you can do to connect with somebody quite early on. If you don't figure those things out, and if you don't manage yourself first, that's the big thing for me. Mindset, confidence, actually going in with the intention of establishing a relationship, not trying to sell. That's the big thing, because if you put the pressure on yourself to try and influence and persuade someone straight away, that pressure, as you'll know, Paul, that pressure is felt not only by you, but the other person. They can sense it. So you've got to learn to relax. You've got to learn to trust yourself. You've got to learn to make that, actually, my first objective is not to sell, it's to connect and build a relationship. And once I've connected and built a relationship, then I can start to understand if there's an opportunity for us to work together. But until that happens, I should actually go back to that primary objective, which is establish relationship. And when you think about when you're trying to persuade and influence anybody of anything, your friends, family, colleagues, your manager, if you're in a job, actually, if you don't seek first to get that relationship established, build trust and rapport, you really are going to struggle to influence and persuade anybody. So you have to start there. And I've relearned that lesson so many times in my career, where I'm in a position where I think this isn't going the way it should go. And the big miss or the big gap is that I don't have a strong enough relationship here to influence this person. And so you have to go back sometimes to those steps. And for me, it's the same in a sales conversation. It's the same in a leadership conversation, a coaching conversation. If that trust isn't established, if trust isn't high, being able to effectively influence, persuade, or challenge somebody, it is really, really difficult. You trip yourself up before you start.
Yeah. So do you think that's, relearning that, is that your biggest mindset challenge, do you think? Or has there been something else that you've struggled with, which has been, a good lesson to learn, and you may have come through it, or you may still be struggling with it? Is there something which, the audience might be able to relate to with your own struggles?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me, I don't think it's that relearning to connect with people. The biggest thing for me is learning to trust my judgment, learning to recognize when a situation is really challenging, whether it's a short-term situation or an ongoing situation. When it's really challenging, my mind, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, my mind starts to undermine me. It'll start to put in these little, is this going to work? Why are you doing this? Are you even, able to help this person? Those little things that start to creep in, those doubts. And the big transformation for me is being able to be aware of that internal dialogue, to be able to separate and distance myself from it, recognize that that voice isn't mine, or it's not me. It may be a voice in my mind, but it's not me. And that I can actually start to not only distance myself from it, but talk myself around. So bring myself to the point where that voice doesn't have to have any effect on me. I can recognize it for what it is. It's a protection or defense mechanism. I can rationalize with it and start to give some evidence to say, actually, these things are in place. There was this positive response. This is, the plan, and we're working on it. And just those simple changes in mindset have been really beneficial. But I do find that I revisit them on a regular basis. I revisit those conversations with myself because I think it's interesting. I do some work on mindset as part of the programs I run with sales teams and leadership teams. And I always quote some statistics from, I think it's the American Psychological Association, where they did quite an in-depth research study on default thinking. And what they found was that, generally speaking, if in this huge cohort in this study they did, that 50% of the time when the mind's job is to create thoughts, as we know, but 50% of the time those thoughts will default to negative. And it is part of a defense kind of protection mechanism. And if we recognize that and we can start to reshape our thinking and redirect our thoughts and our focus, then it can be useful and beneficial. But for so many people who haven't been trained how to do that or coached on that, they find themselves following that negative train of thought, and all of a sudden it can actually physically become quite a barrier to them taking action or doing something they really want to do for fear of being undermined almost by themselves. That's the big challenge, I would say.
Yeah, I've heard of that study. I know that the percentages vary a little bit, but one thing that does stand out from it is that 95% of our thoughts are repetitive. So 50% onwards is negative. And unless you're choosing to have new thoughts, which lead to new feelings and new behaviors, you're simply just going to repeat yesterday, which is quite a scary thought.
It is a scary thought. It is a scary thought. And I think it's why setting, personal and professional goals is so important. I think, for me, early in my career, I was just doing what I did and, kind of drifting along because I didn't know any better. And it wasn't until I started to get more interested in my own professional and personal development, started reading, started kind of researching, okay, what do the successful people on this planet do? How do they get there? How do they think? And book by book, insight by insight, I started to recognize this opportunity to start to set goals for myself and start to create, a plan for work and for my life. And that really has been transformational, because if at any point I do find myself, following that negative train of thought, I can bring myself back to what are the goals I've set for myself? What am I trying to achieve? Why is that important? And that can recenter me on what I'm really looking to achieve, rather than just being on default. And for years, up until probably until my late 20s, I was on default without even realizing it. I didn't even realize there was another option.
That's the thing, though, isn't it? You don't know what you don't know. So what do you think, the more you explore mindset, which is very handy being on the Mindset Change podcast, I mean, what do you think has created the biggest shift for you overall? Not just professionally, but even personally. Is there something that you learned, a light bulb moment, which just went, okay, that's just changed the way I see reality?
Yeah, I think the big thing was this. So I trained as an NLP practitioner. If anybody hasn't heard NLP, I'd be surprised if they're listening to this podcast, Paul, because I know you talk a lot about different techniques and principles. But NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. And my understanding of it is, it's about how the body and the mind are connected through the nervous system, and how you can start to recondition and redirect your mind and your focus, and the impact that has not only on how you think, but how you feel and act. And that's what's really important. And the big shift for me was when I learned about NLP, and then I learned about there's a coach called Tony Robbins from the US, and he reimagined NLP and calls it NAC. So instead of neuro-linguistic programming, he talks about neuro-associative conditioning. And I remember learning about NLP and then learning about neuro-associative conditioning, and effectively what the principles say is that you can start to redirect your thoughts. And that was a real light bulb for me, because up until that point, I hadn't realized I could direct my thoughts. I thought they were on autopilot, just what I thought happened. So that, and it takes a bit of practice, and that's where, the neuroassociative conditioning comes in, because, anybody listening to this who maybe has had that same light bulb moment, I can direct my thoughts, it's not as easy as we think. So actually you have to go through a process of...
Justin, what does it mean?
Sorry, Paul.
Just for listeners, very quickly, sorry to interrupt, but what does it mean to direct your thoughts? Just so if anyone's there listening thinking, huh?
Okay. Yeah. So the mind, we said the mind's job is to create thoughts, right? It's to just produce thoughts in our head. But those thoughts aren't random. They don't have to just surface as and when. We can actually start to, if a thought comes up that I'm not comfortable with, I don't have to accept that thought. I can say, well, hold on a minute. Instead of that, why don't I think about this instead? Or actually, what do I want to think instead of that? And in your mind, you can change it. So if for example, a big example for me used to be, if I'd go into like an event or a big meeting, or if I was public speaking, and in my mind, I'd already start to feel really anxious. And I recognized that if I thought about being anxious, then that is exactly what would happen. And I could be anxious well before the event and during the event. But if I changed my thinking and started to redirect my thoughts, so I literally would pause and say, okay, instead of being anxious, how do I want to feel instead? And so then I'd say, okay, so I want to feel confident. I want to feel calm. I want to feel collected. I want to feel excited. And just that shift in thinking enabled me to start to change. Now, it wasn't as simple as the first time I redirected my thoughts. I was able to then be calm, confident, collected. But over time, when I was in those different situations and I continued to redirect my focus, and instead of allowing my mind to go into default and make me feel nervous, I would say, actually, Justin, there's a great video by Simon Sinek where he talks about fear and excitement as being two sides of the same coin, and that all of your physiological responses are the same. So when you're feeling fearful versus when you're feeling excited, there's a lot of commonality, clammy palms, elevated heart rate, maybe sometimes you feel a little bit, heady, and that is exactly the same. All those symptoms are the same as excitement. So if in your mind you can get to the point where you say, well, perhaps I'm feeling excited instead of fearful. Actually, what if this was excitement? How do I switch this to excitement? Those questions and that redirection and focus can help you to move really quickly from one state to another. And learning that and then relearning it, repeating it over and over again. Early on when I learned these principles, I got a bit frustrated because I couldn't get them to work every time. And there'll still be the odd occasion where I have to work harder at it. But the more you do this, this is the conditioning part. The more you do this, the more easy it becomes and the more effective you are at being able to change your emotional and psychological state when you need to. And that was the big thing for me. I can actually change my psychological and emotional state when I need to. And if you told 20-year-old Justin, you will be able to control your emotional and psychological state through, self-coaching, through, redirecting your focus in your mind, I would have struggled to believe you, because back then I didn't have that level of ability, and it's something that you do have to practice.
I mean, that is incredibly powerful. Yeah, it's fear and excitement are technically, I mean, I'm not sure how is there much in the way difference, but they are in physiology pretty much the same. But it's our perception that creates, our story, that creates our experience. So yeah, that's incredibly powerful. I'm going to dive into a question that I wonder how you're going to respond to this one. But what do you think? You're looking like you got a face of dread there. What am I going to say? So I'm going to ask you, what bullshit is mostly spoken in your world? What, in the mindset world, in leadership, in sales, what's the big thing that gets you to roll your eyes and think, no, this isn't true?
The bullshit stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the big thing is this whole thing about pitch and persuasion. People do want to be led. I firmly believe that. But if you're just pitching ideas, or if as a leader, if you're just directing and pushing people, short term you can get some results. If you want to be overly pushy or persuasive, you can get people to react and respond. But what I've learned over the years, I've been doing either sales or leadership for about 28 years now. I was 50 last year. It's about 20, it's been 29 years this year. And the thing I've learned is that you can get some short-term results and impact from either being pushy or pitchy or being, directive as either a leader or a salesperson. But if you want long-term, sustainable, long-lasting relationships, results, and performance, you have to change your outlook. You have to start to, engage with people, ask great questions, be curious, coach them, start to change the way they think, and help them to do that in a way where they accept those changes, they don't resist them. And what you'll find is that you'll get much more sustainable long-term results. And it's the same for managing ourselves. If we don't show ourselves, compassion, kindness, empathy, actually, the amount of times earlier in my life, early 20s, I would be frustrated and almost be in conflict with myself. It was strange. And then I found that I really struggled to change when I was in that conflict state. Whereas as soon as I started to be a bit more appreciative of myself, a bit kinder to myself, a bit more understanding and empathetic, and I know it might sound a bit strange being empathetic with yourself, but I think you'll know what I mean. As you start to accept yourself for who you are, and that you lower the resistance to change. And so for me, there's that whole, the big myth or the big misconception is push, the grind, direct, push people, and you'll get some form of change. I don't think you get sustainable change. It takes a more empathetic approach to change ourselves and to change people around us. And then that becomes much more sustainable, and people want to be part of that change rather than resisting it. That's the big thing for me.
That's really powerful. I mean, that's what you talk about in your book, Coaching Leaders, Unlock Your Leadership Superpower.
Yes.
So what is it?
And for both,
what is leadership superpower?
Yeah, for me, it is coaching as a leadership style, because so I had multiple, leadership positions, both in sales, business, and now, of course, I run my own business. And the thing I noticed early in my leadership career, it was probably a couple of years before I had some formal leadership development and in particular coaching. So my first couple of attempts at leadership, I wasn't leading, I was managing. And if any of your listeners have been or are in positions where they're working in a business or they're working in a functional role and they're good at what they do, if you're really good at what you do, if you're a high performer, what happens is at some point someone probably will say to you, you should try management. And you think, that's a great idea. It's the next, natural career progression for me. And unless you're given some direction and some guidance and some coaching, what very often happens, and I've noticed it with myself, I've noticed it with my clients, noticed it with peers when I was in leadership positions, you move from high performer to manager, and you make this assumption that everybody thinks and acts like you do. And then you start managing a team and you recognize that you're in the top 10%, and that's why you're now a manager. And you think, oh, well, it's just easy. I'll just tell them what to do. And what happens is people resist it because they're like, well, you haven't done my job. I've got a very specific set of circumstances, Justin, that it won't necessarily work your way. And you meet this resistance without realizing it. A lot of this is, people don't say this to you. They just resist, there's this passive resistance. And the only way, I've found out the hard way, a couple of years, it was a really hard slog in a management position where I was like, why on earth can't I seem to get a change in people's perception, a change in performance. And it wasn't until I went on a coaching course and I learned the power of coaching that everything changed. And I had to stop myself then from being directive, from telling people what to do, from picking up on faults, to starting to harness people's own internal motivation. So the reason coaching as a leadership superpower, or is a leadership superpower, is because it starts to harness people's own intrinsic motivation to improve their performance, improve their responsibility, and ultimately their performance and potential in the future. So it took me a while to realize that. It took me a while then to actually change and implement that. And the book really is a roadmap to starting with you, if you're a leader, starting with you to assess your current position, think about the way that you currently manage and your perspective of your people, start to introduce some concepts and ideas of leadership, not management, because, the big thing is we manage tasks, we lead people, and get people to start with your own perspective shift, then introduce some ideas about how you can manage yourself, because if anybody is in a leadership position listening to this, they will know it's the most difficult role in any business, because you don't get a lot of thanks for it. You get a lot more pressure. Very often you're stuck in the middle of, trying to meet business objectives and trying to manage your team and keep everybody, motivated, engaged, and satisfied. It's a really difficult position, leadership. And so once you understand those difficulties and you change your perception of it, then you can start to introduce a structure. And the book Coaching Leaders works through, we call it the coach model, which helps people go through 5 different stages of building relationships, building trust, building clarity with their teams, setting and agreeing expectations, letting your team perform at a higher level, and then coaching them and developing them and helping them to think about their careers and a greater contribution in your business. And as a structure, it's a really great roadmap, but it starts right at the beginning with that differentiation around what is coaching and leadership and what is management.
And do you think that we all have like an inner leader? Are we all capable of unlocking our leadership superpower? I mean, 'cause I guess that this is obviously that's great within coaching and the business world, but in life itself, I'm often reminded by the people that I get to coach that they're from whatever reason following, and yet they have such power in themselves to take more control and to be more of the creator of their life. Do you think your book would help someone who was looking at unlocking their own inner leader, or do you have any advice for someone who's sort of thinking, actually, do you know what, I'm a bit bored of following life and being maybe a sheeple, as we sometimes derogatively say? What is it that would help someone let that out?
Yeah, I think when I think about my past experiences, it's really important that we have leaders and followers, right? Because even leaders, so as a leader in a business, I was still following, my business director or vice president, so I was still having to lead my organization and be a follower. So I think you'll always end up doing both. I think it's important that you recognize that. Okay. But the first thing I think is having that desire for leadership. I've seen people promoted into management or leadership positions who didn't want the promotion or didn't want the position, and that in itself was the reason that they weren't successful or didn't get the results they were looking for. So I think that first point is really important. If you want to be a leader, there's this the definition of the word desire is about igniting thought. And if you think about it, if you have a thought, if there's something you really want, the reason you really want it is because it's possible. That's what I believe. I believe if you really want something enough, the reason you want it is because it's possible. So if somebody's listening to this, they're like, at the moment I'm in a position where I'm maybe an individual contributor, and actually I'd really like to move into leadership. The fact that you want to do it is the ignition and the motivation and the resource you need to do it. Then it's about finding the best approach, finding mentors, finding a structure, and your own self-confidence to enable you to do it. So I think everybody does have the capability, but they have to want to do it. And then it's not enough to just want to do it. That for me is that, I talk about psychology, skills, and systems. Wanting to do something, having the desire to do something is the psychology. I want that. But, just wanting something isn't good enough. You have to be capable. And even if you're not capable today, it doesn't mean you can't be capable in, 3, 6, 12 months time, but you have to then start to develop your skills. So you have to develop the right approach. You have to start to work on your communication. You have to read and research. You have to try some things out. You have to be prepared to try and fail and then try again. You might fail again and then try again, and then you'll succeed. So you have to be prepared to take those risks, take that action, and be resilient enough in the face of failure to keep trying. And that's a big part of it. It's a learned skill. It links then back to the psychology. Do I have the mindset to continue and succeed? So you've got, the right mindset, the right desire. I think that's the foundation. Then you've got to develop the right skills. As I said, very often that's communication. Whatever we're trying to do, normally it's communication skills, really important for any of us in any of our roles. And then the final piece of the puzzle that I've learned is to systemize. So if I've got really good skills and I'm super motivated, actually, if I tear around doing the wrong things at the wrong point in time, I still won't succeed. I have to understand, right, when is the time to have a reset conversation with somebody? When is the right time to sit down and spend some time talking about objectives? When is the right time for a coaching conversation? When's the right time to just say to somebody, look, course correct, we just need to move and do something different. And that knowledge, you only get that knowledge to some degree through experience. And, experience is code for I messed up a lot, learned a lot, redirected and was able to correct. But then the structure and the system is about looking for, the cues, the clues for success. Success does leave clues. So following, if somebody has already done something multiple times over and over again, and, for me, it's coaching as a leader, I've documented it, roadmapped it. It's not only in the book, we run programs on it, but that's a really important distinction for people. Have the desire, develop the skills, follow a structure that will work. And you don't have to figure these things out for yourself. There's so many people have got these experiences that they can start to present you with the roadmap so you can follow in their footsteps.
Nice. But we haven't got long left before we're coming to the end of our interview. But I wanted to ask you, because I know that besides being an amazing coach, and you help so many people in regards to their unlocking their inner leader and learning how to sell, but you also run a mental health group, men's mental health group.
I do, Paul. Yes, I do. So I set up.
Tell me a little bit about that, because that might appeal to
thanks.
That might be something that would be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So back in 2019, I noticed I've got a number of people in my network, and a couple of them were running what they call walk and talk for men groups. One was in Birmingham, one was in Essex, and I saw these groups really kind of trying to support men in their local environment, and it just something inspired me. I personally had a bit of a challenging time in 2015 to 17. It was actually the reason why I left the corporate world, was because I was in a really high-powered job, big American company, lots of pressure, not a lot of empathy, a real shift in the culture of the organization from caring about people to only caring about numbers. And I just I got burnt out. And I went through a period of time where actually it was in a quite dark place. And I had to do quite a lot of work on myself to get myself, get my well-being reestablished, feel good about myself, get, my mental resources back to full strength. And I noticed that the provision of NHS services was really poor. It was all online. It was all a bit remote. There was nothing, and this was pre-COVID, so it wasn't anything to do with COVID. It was all just very sparse and poorly organised. And it was that, so that had been in my mind for a while. So roll on to 2019, I saw, these mental health walk and talk for men groups. So I decided that I'd start my own. I contacted the guy that founded it, and he said, yeah, just, set up a Facebook page and go for it. So I set this group up in Cambridgeshire called Walk and Talk for Men St. Neots. And that started so we did our first walk in March 2021. And first walk, we do it in a nature reserve called Paxton Pits, which is in Cambridgeshire. And the first walk, I put together a Facebook page, did a bit of promotion locally, and we had 8 men join us for the first walk, which was brilliant. Nice, one of the guys that turned up at the first walk said, "Oh, I'd love to be involved in this if you want a hand." So he almost immediately partnered with me, a guy called Steve Whitney. He's a brilliant guy. And sadly, Steve had lost his son to suicide. 21, 22-year-old son. He'd lost him to suicide. So Steve's desire to want to help was because he'd been through, he knows his son had been through difficult times with mental health. He was then obviously going through a difficult time because I think it was only a year later that he came to that walk. So Steve and I then started running these walks. So we're 2.5 years on now, and we have a WhatsApp group with about 125, 130 men in it. We regularly get somewhere between 20 and 25 men join our walks. We get a continual kind of fresh new men join us, and it's been an incredible experience. We've become part of our local community. A lot of us get recognised. We get a lot of men signposted to us through their GP surgery because we've got quite a good reach now in terms of local NHS services. We're also coordinating with our local Mind charity, other men's mental health support groups, including kind of cancer support groups, that kind of thing, where it just would become, I suppose, a part of the fabric of the local community, which has been incredible actually over the last couple of years. We've now got 6 of us who are walk ambassadors. So there's 6, in fact 8 of us who are now supporting the group more proactively. So there's we run a walk every single week, and we've just, some of the stories of men who have joined us who have been in really dark places, had some really difficult challenges to deal with, and the group has become, a real support for them to help and provide guidance and sometimes just give them someone to talk to, a bit of a community to engage with. And yeah, just it's probably one of the things I'm most proud of in the last, 5 years since I started working for myself was this group and the community that it's become in our local kind of area.
Beautiful. Justin, thank you so much for coming on the show. Finally got you.
My pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Paul. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I wanted to sort of just open up about you, what you're going through, and what your experiences are. And I think there's a lot of gold here for my audience. So if anyone's interested in reaching out to you, I mean, I'll put your details in the show notes anyway. But for anyone listening, where can people find you?
So my surname's Leigh, so it's Justin Leigh, Leigh. I am active on LinkedIn, so you'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm active on Facebook and on Instagram. I'm Justin Leigh Coach on all 3 of those channels. So social media is probably the best way to get in touch. My email, I'm happy to share my email. So it's Justin Leigh, all one word, at focus4, which is a number 4, growth.co.uk. So feel free to email me if you'd like a conversation about any of the work that I'm doing. Yeah, I'd be delighted to hear from people.
Brilliant. Again, thank you so much for coming to the show. Hope you have an incredible day.
My pleasure. Thanks, Paul.